There are those who once commanded entire kitchens, teams, even eras, and one day they're replaced, without a single word of thanks. But true legacy was never tied to a title. She had once been a culinary legend, 3 Michelin stars, best-selling cookbooks, invitations to teach across the globe, and then she vanished. 2 years later she returned, not with fanfare or acclaim, but under a false name, with one simple wish: to cook again, the way she did when she first fell in love with it. But the kitchen she walked into was no longer a kitchen. It had become a soulless machine, a system run from the shadows, a place where everyone followed, but no one truly lived. This wasn't just a story about a woman reborn. It was a story about an old fire passed on to a new generation, not through commands, but through silence at the right moment. And in the end, it was the ones who seemed the weakest, who carried the warmth of a flame thought long extinguished. Are you ready to step into the story? Press play. And if you've ever felt pushed to the sidelines, let this story remind you. Some dishes don't need names. They only need to be tasted with truth. Chapter 1. The Return to Fire. Chicago in March was unforgiving. The city awoke under a wind that sliced through alleyways of glass towers, skimming patches of ice clinging to half-thawed sidewalks. Every step felt like slipping. Across memory, Amelia Hartwell sat in the back seat of a taxi, her hand resting lightly on the handle of a canvas bag. Inside was a chef's knife, her companion for nearly a decade, and a single printed letter. No apologies, no thanks. Just one handwritten line: if you still believe the fire hasn't gone out, come back. Not to cook, but to save. Maxwell Richards. 2 years ago he had humiliated her in front of the entire kitchen. Now he was the one calling her back, not as a chef, but as the one to save this kitchen. She didn't know why she said yes. Maybe it was compassion, maybe curiosity, or maybe it was the instinct of someone who once burned her youth away in Paris kitchens, knowing that if a flame still flickered somewhere, she couldn't stand outside and let it die. The cab stopped. Outside Elevation, once hailed as the cathedral of technique in Chicago's culinary scene. The facade was unchanged, sleek glass, stainless steel, and a minimalist sign. But as Amelia stepped out, something inside her tightened. Something here had gone cold. Not the temperature, the spirit. She entered through the staff door. No one recognized her. No one looked up. Line cooks kept their eyes down. Servers avoided eye contact. A strange silence blanketed the kitchen, where once there had been orders flying, blades clashing, and laughter tangled with tension. A young woman with a tight, worried face scribbled at the expo counter. Amelia approached. "I'm Amelia Hartwell. I'm scheduled to meet with Chef Richards this morning." The girl froze, looked up, her eyes wide like she'd just heard a ghost's name. I'm sorry, but Chef Richards no longer runs the kitchen." "He's not in charge?" "He's still a shareholder, but he doesn't cook here anymore. All directives come from higher up." Amelia didn't ask who higher up meant. She knew that tone too well. This wasn't a kitchen led by a chef's blade anymore. This was a kitchen run by spreadsheets. They brought her to the main kitchen. The moment the door opened, her heart sank. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too perfect. Knives lined up, fridges sealed. The only scent, disinfectant. In a good kitchen you hear heat in the bubbling stock, smell brown butter turning golden, feel the pace in the footsteps. Here, only the careful shuffling of people working to survive, not to cook. Daniel, the Sioux. Chef appeared with a worn apron and deep shadows under his eyes. He stopped cold when he saw her. "You came back." "And elevation disappeared," she replied, eyes never leaving the hollow kitchen. He nodded gently. "It hasn't disappeared, it's just not alive anymore." They sat in the staff break room. Amelia didn't need coffee, but she held the paper cup just to keep her hands busy. "It's been nearly a year. We follow a fixed menu, no changes allowed. Every dish must be precise down to the gram. But no one teaches why." "What about Maxwell?" "He hasn't shown up since October. But each week someone from corporate sends update emails. A few new items, a few new rules, no one's ever seen them." "And you stayed?" "Because some of us are still here for the same reason I once had." Daniel looked at her. Faith that this kitchen once had a soul. That afternoon, Amelia walked through each station. She examined every detail, the knives in use, the temperature of the heat lamps, the movements of the young trainees. No one was yelled at. No one corrected, no one taught. She didn't see chefs, only shadows mimicking form. She had once despised Maxwell's tyranny, but at least he knew what cooking meant. In a corner of the pastry station, she noticed a girl cutting tart shells with a paring knife rather than a mold, hesitant, clumsy, but her gaze was steady. "What's your name?" The girl startled. "Claire, I'm the new pastry assistant." "Who taught you to cut pastry this way?" Claire lowered her head. "No one. I watched a video from last week's menu." "And no one corrected you?" "No." Amelia studied her a moment longer, then picked up the knife, one brief motion, a soft wrist twist, tracing the inner ring, letting the blunt edge block the pressure. "The crust is the foundation of dessert," she said quietly. "If it cracks, everything else falls." Claire nodded, hands trembling. "And if your heart shakes," Amelia added, "just remember, a correct dish isn't one without mistakes. It's the one that knows where it went wrong." She walked away before Claire could ask anything else. That night, Amelia returned to a small rental near the train station. The room was bare, just a writing desk, a yellow lamp, and a voice recorder. She pulled out Maxwell's printed letter and read the line again. "Not to cook, but to save." She let out a soft laugh. "Save, huh? Then where are you, Maxwell?" She opened her notebook. Wrote her first line. Day 1, no Maxwell, no fire. Just the kitchen, and me. Tomorrow morning she would light the stove, not with gas, but with meaning. Chapter 2. The Ghost in the Kitchen. Not everything invisible is a lie. Some things are gone, yet they remain, like the sighs in a kitchen no one hears. Amelia was up by 5 a.m., even though she wasn't scheduled to prep anything. She walked from her rented room to elevation, hands tucked into her coat pockets, heart strangely hollow. The city at dawn barely made a sound, but in her head too many voices whispered. Some were the familiar clinks of knives from kitchens long gone. Some were Maxwell's words, the ones she thought she had left behind across the ocean years ago. A good chef needs no teacher. A great one knows whom to learn from. He said that when she was 23, still believing that all she needed was recognition. Now she was 36. Recognition didn't matter anymore. Only truth did. The kitchen at 5:45 a.m. resembled a luxury morgue. The floor light still hummed. The stainless steel gleamed, Everything was pristine to the point of surrealism. A place without people, without flaws, without life. Amelia made herself a cup of black tea, no sugar. She sat on a wooden stool near the back entrance. The sous vide station in the distance hummed quietly. There was something in the air that made her shiver. She closed her eyes and listened. An old habit she'd used every morning at Leto. Listen to the kitchen breathe. But this kitchen didn't breathe. A.M. Daniel walked in, clipboard in hand. He froze when he saw her. "You're in early." "This kitchen doesn't sleep," Amelia murmured. "Or you don't." "Both." Daniel took the seat across from her. His eyes no longer dodged like the day before. Now they carried a quiet exhaustion, one so practiced it had become routine. "Something's off in this kitchen, Daniel." "We've been living with that off for almost a year now." Amelia nodded. "I need the last 3 months. Menus. And any internal reviews if they exist." Daniel hesitated, then pulled a slim folder from his bag. "Be careful what you're about to read. It's like flipping through your own memorial." The winter restructure menu from Elevation was immaculate, on brand and exact. 7-course tasting. French technique meets indigenous American ingredients. But one dish made Amelia stop. Solstice Bay, foie gras confit on caramelized. Wild mushrooms, fermented mango gel, and white Riesling reduction. Her hand trembled. Her heartbeat skipped a beat. It was a dish that had never been published. A creation she made solely for her mother. A dish that existed only in one handwritten version, tucked inside her private recipe journal back in Paris. "Daniel." "Yeah?" "Do you know who first added this dish to the menu?" He hesitated. "No idea. It came from a proposal signed M.R. Maxwell." "Not sure. We haven't seen him since October. But someone from his side sends a new menu every month." Amelia stared at the italicized name, Solstice Bay. A silence heavy as stone pressed against her chest. A.M. Brunch service began. Amelia stood at the corner, quietly observing. No one noticed her, but she noted everything. Knife slips. Dishes sent back, glances from nervous trainees. Claire, the pastry girl from yesterday, was cutting tart shells correctly now, but her face still carried fear. Nearby, someone was preparing foie gras, the exact Solstice Bay dish. Amelia walked over. "Let me see the prepped foie." The station led, a young chef named Jules, handed over a tray of milk-soaked liver. "Who are you?" he asked, suspicious. "The only person who ever made this dish without needing a recipe." Jules froze. Amelia picked up the foie gras, gently pressing it with her thumb. The outer membrane hadn't been cleaned properly. "This liver's been soaked over 18 hours. It'll be bitter. The Riesling sauce needs a second alcohol reduction. Cold, not direct flame. And the mango? Don't use the South American variety. It doesn't ferment into the third acidity layer." The entire station went silent. "Who are you, really?" Jules asked again. Amelia didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away. Calm, step by step, as if she'd just taken the last light from a simulation room. That evening, Amelia wandered through West Loop, not to relax but to remember. 2 years ago, she thought she had let it all go. Paris, fame, recipes. But someone hadn't let her go. Someone had stepped into her old kitchen. Read her private notes. Stolen something that never belonged to Elevation. Maxwell, was it you? She stood in front of a small roadside eatery. The smell of grilled meat rose from a clay oven, making her smile without realizing. A mother was cutting a sandwich in half for her child. The little girl laughed, face full of crumbs and sunlight. Amelia closed her eyes. Her hands curled into fists. That night in her rented room, she opened her notebook and wrote for the first time in months. Day 2. Someone took the recipe, but I'm not angry. I just want to know, who were they cooking for? Who did they dare touch the heart of mine for? Chapter 3. The Knife in the Drawer. Amelia couldn't quite remember what woke her at exactly 3:17 a.m. Maybe it was the sound of a distant train whistle drifting through the city streets. Maybe it was the vague, inexplicable sense that someone somewhere was calling her name. What she did remember was the emptiness in her chest, as if her heart had beaten enough for one lifetime, and now only silence remained. Silence filled with words that never got spoken. She sat up in the dark, pulled her notebook close, fingers brushing against the worn spine, then opened to the unfinished page. She didn't need to write. The words were already echoing in her mind like a blade slowly honed on stone. Some wounds aren't inflicted. Just let the silence last long enough, and it becomes a cut. When Amelia entered Elevation at 7 a.m., the kitchen was already in motion. But something was off. Every eye turned toward her, not with admiration, not the curious glances of her first day, but a strange mixture of unease, curiosity, and caution. Jewel, the young chef she had corrected yesterday, avoided eye contact as he passed. Claire kept her head down during prep. Even Daniel was unusually quiet. Amelia said nothing. She simply tied on her apron, washed her hands, and began organizing her station. Then a phone rang, softly, forgotten on a prep table. No one reacted. But the image on the lock screen was impossible to miss. The fall of Elevation, from perfection to parody, bold in red. Her heart sank. She took out her own phone, searched for the article. It was the top headline in the dining section of Culinary Standard. Polished, edited. Not some careless blogger's opinion, but every line cut like a knife, over and over, aimed at the same place. Amelia Hartwell. The opening read like an indictment. When Elevation announced the return of former star chef Amelia Hartwell, the culinary world braced for a bold rebirth. What followed instead was a downward spiral, not for lack of technique but lack of conviction. Perhaps not every fire can be rekindled once it goes out. An old photo was attached. Amelia at 29, center of the grand Leto kitchen, eyes sharp, as a Santoku blade, hair tied tight, commanding 3 lines at once. The woman in the photo seemed from another world, and Amelia wasn't sure if that woman even existed anymore. The article continued its dissection. Elevation is no longer a temple of refinement or innovation. Under the cold hands of a once genius, it's become a soulless lab. Each dish, technical exercise rather than a story worth tasting. No one said anything as she walked past the line, but she knew. They'd read it, and they assumed she knew they had read it. She didn't blame them. Everyone's just trying to survive. She sat at the end of the hallway, on the wooden bench beside the drawer with the stuck handle. It used to creak loudly when pulled too fast. Now it was silent, like everything else in this kitchen. Her hands rested on the cold wood. These were the same hands that earned 3 Michelin stars so quickly that journalists called it suspicious. The same hands that had once made people cry over lamb simmered in red wine. Now they simply gripped the edge of the bench, trying not to shake. Daniel appeared, stood quietly behind her, said nothing. After a moment he sat beside her. His voice was soft but steady. "You don't deserve this." "Maybe," she replied. "Or maybe I once did. It's not your fault the food lost its soul." Daniel, sometimes what kills a dish isn't the technique. It's the weight of someone else's expectations. The loneliest thing is cooking for someone who no longer sits at the table. He looked at her, not as a sous chef to a head chef, but like someone who'd seen another person fall and understood. Sometimes falling isn't failure. Sometimes it's just gravity pulling you back to where you were meant to begin again. Amelia stared into the quiet air. "I used to think all I needed was to disappear for a while. Then I could return, clean, full of fire. But the truth is, when you vanish, someone else will use your absence to build another version of you. And if you're not careful, even you might believe that version is who you are." Silence stretched between them. The kitchen began its midday service. Tickets, printed. Staff moved quickly around them, but no one interrupted. After a while, Amelia stood, took off her apron, walked toward the management office, pulled her personnel file from the shelf, quietly, said nothing to anyone. Daniel called after her. "Where are you going?" She turned. Her face was calm, her eyes deep, like wine aged. In oak and silence. "I'm not leaving, but if I keep standing here like a ghost no one believes in, what will the others learn? That talent can be erased by one article? That a name means nothing if no one defends it? Then what will you do?" "I'll cook, not to prove anything, but the way I did on the day I first knew I loved this." Daniel paused. He wanted to say something, but stopped. She walked away, leaving him with the unfinished thought, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, the drawer still held the real knife, the one sharp enough to cut through doubt, forgetfulness, and fear. Chapter 4. The Apprentice. Some come to the kitchen to learn how to cook. Others come to answer the questions they were never allowed to ask. The morning began like any other. Prep lists printed, tasks assigned. Daniel crossed off absent names. Amelia stood at the far end of the kitchen, watching every knife rhythm, every sauce being whisked. No one mentioned the article from yesterday, but everyone knew it still lingered, like the burnt smell of toast that never quite leaves no matter how many times you vent the room. Amelia made her way to the pastry station when a voice rang out, clear and firm. "Excuse me, I'm new, here for my scheduled internship this week." A girl stood at the kitchen threshold, hair tied high, crisp white uniform, no unnecessary motion, eyes alert, so sharp they made the already cold kitchen feel like a surgical theater. Amelia nodded. "Name?" "Rachel," she answered plainly. "Any experience?" "Enough to know I don't know anything." Amelia raised an eyebrow. A clever answer, well rehearsed. Not the kind of reply you'd expect from someone still nervous about slicing onions. She assigned Rachel to the pastry station, under Claire, but kept her eyes on her longer than necessary. There was something in the way Rachel observed, not to learn but to record, analyze, assess, like Amelia once did. Long ago, but different, colder. A week passed. Rachel spoke little, worked cleanly, made no real mistakes, but Amelia began to notice things. She took notes quickly, but not of recipes. She wrote names, times, the order of tasks. Once Amelia caught her standing by the knife rack, fingertips resting on the handle of an old Japanese blade, its hilt rusted from age. Maxwell's knife. She didn't ask, but she remembered. Friday afternoon, between lunch and dinner service, the kitchen settled into its quiet lull. Amelia walked into the pantry and found Rachel already there, holding a leather-bound notebook. The light from the high window caught the edge of the book, illuminating the dust in the air. The moment seemed to glow and freeze all at once. Rachel closed the notebook, slipped it into her pocket. Amelia didn't. Move closer. She simply asked gently, "You know who I am, don't you?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. Her face remained calm, her gaze steady. "You're the reason my father isn't here anymore." The voice, neither angry nor trembling, just factual, as if stating today's weather had a light breeze. Amelia stepped closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "Maxwell is your father," Rachel nodded. "I assumed you used a false name. My real name is Emily Richards. Rachel was the name my mother wanted for me, if I'd been her first daughter. I used it to see if you'd recognize it." "And what are you looking for?" The girl was silent, then answered with a voice both challenging and quietly aching for contradiction. "The reason my father, the chef once called the best in Chicago, ended in silence. Why no one trusts him anymore. Why no one remembers. Why your name gets resurrected and his is erased." Amelia tightened the knot on her apron. A familiar tension returning, somewhere between compassion, hurt, and something that felt like understanding. "You think I took everything from him?" "I don't think. I was taught that." "Taught by who?" "By him." For a moment, Amelia wanted to tear it all down, to tell her about how Maxwell weaponized the Wellington, how he set her up to cook her best dish, only to humiliate her publicly, to tell her about the letter inviting her back, about the stolen recipe, about the article that slandered her name, and how no one dared speak for her. But she looked at Rachel, not an enemy, but a younger version of herself, the self that still believed everything spoken by someone she loved was the only truth. The self that still believed grown-ups failed because of someone else, not time, not pressure, not their own undoing. Amelia exhaled slowly, her voice low but unwavering. "Your father was a great chef, but he forgot that cooking isn't just technique. It's listening, and for years he heard nothing but the sound of his own voice. And you think you're better than him? No, I think I was more like him than you realize, and that's exactly why I can't hate him." Rachel froze, her face tightened, like she was trying to hold together a mirror already cracked. "I won't let you erase what he once was." "You don't have to," Amelia replied gently. "Memories don't vanish, Emily. They just shift shape, when we're brave enough to see them from another side." In the golden dusk, the pantry became a stage where two generations stood, not as adversaries but as two chefs, trying to understand each other through the unspoken language of flame, knives, and scars no one else could see. Chapter 5. The Recipe She Never Wrote. Some memories don't live on paper, they live in taste, and if someone happens to taste them, we know the past never left. No one really knew who added the dish to the menu. There was no confirmation email, no signature on the printed sheet from the coordination desk. But a week after Rachel's arrival, One of the Saturday night specials had changed. The updated list had just been pinned to the steel board at the back of the kitchen. The ink was still wet. Baby white radish soup with dill cream, slow-roasted heirloom tomatoes, and black ash vinegar. Amelia froze. Her heart didn't race. It skipped, and then disappeared entirely. It was that dish, not famous, never published, never mentioned in interviews, but it was a dish she had created one cold, windy night in Paris. She had sat on the floor of the Leto kitchen, still in uniform, tears falling for no reason she could name. Just a sudden ache for her father, the man who used to peel radishes for her when her mother was away. She'd thought, if I can make a radish taste gentle, maybe everything will feel gentler too. She never wrote the recipe down. Cooked it only 3 times. Once for herself. Once for her father, the last time he was strong enough to eat hot soup. And once for someone who loved her. Simply by sitting, in silence while she cooked. She stared at the paper like it was a blade reopening an old scar. No one noticed. People kept chopping onions, roasting chickens, adjusting plating. But to her, the world paused for just a moment. Amelia walked straight to the coordination room. Daniel was assigning shifts. Daniel, who approved the new soup? He looked up, confused, but he could tell this wasn't just a menu change. I think marketing proposed it. They said a VIP guest once had it at Leto, wanted to recreate. A memory? Impossible. That dish was never served at Leto. Daniel blinked. Then, where did it come from? Amelia didn't answer. Her fingers curled slightly. Not with rage, but with something colder, like broth left overnight in the fridge. Still deep and suffocating. That evening, Rachel was assigned to assist plating. Amelia stood beside her the entire 3-hour shift. She said nothing. Just adjusted the occasional microgreen. Reminded. A cook to strain a sauce again. Rachel remained composed. Professional. But she could feel Amelia's gaze never once leaving her hands. At the end of the shift, Amelia didn't walk away like she usually did. She set down the final tray and suddenly asked, "Did you like the radish soup tonight?" Rachel blinked, caught off guard. The flavor was unusual, but deep. Deep how? Like, it reminded me of something I never knew. Like missing someone I've never met. Amelia nodded. Her eyes didn't flinch. Some dishes aren't meant to be famous, they exist to keep someone from disappearing. Rachel went still. The words brushed past her face but left a scratch. She slowly turned. You made that dish before? Amelia looked at her. Not with accusation, not with surprise, just quiet. I once thought I'd never cook it again. Rachel said nothing, but something in her expression cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small piece of a wall, giving way deep inside. That night, Rachel sat in her rented room, staring blankly at her laptop. She opened the folder named Amelia Dossier. Screenshots, articles, rumors. Notes her father had dictated to her. One old Word document quoted Maxwell's take on the soup. A dull dish, meaningless, only she would come up with something so absurd. But the soup she tasted today, it wasn't absurd. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trying to impress, and yet it lodged in her throat, as if something whispered, "Slow down, listen, someone was here once." She placed her hand on the desk, remembered all the times her father painted Amelia as ruthless, cold-blooded, ambitious, willing to climb over anyone to rise. But tonight, that same woman had stood beside her for 3 hours. No yelling, no power display, just quietly correcting. Every plate, every swirl of cream, every precise cut, as if cooking was her way of apologizing to the world, without needing anyone to hear it. Rachel stared at the screen. Her hand trembled slightly. For the first time, she wasn't sure anymore who was right, and what unsettled her most wasn't that Maxwell might have been wrong. It was the haunting thought that he might have known the truth and chosen not to say it. Across the city, Amelia sat alone in her apartment. In front of her, a bowl of radish soup. No cream, no garnish, nothing but the flavor. She took a spoonful, smiled softly. Not sad, just a smile that came with understanding. She flipped open her notebook, added one quiet line beneath yesterday's. Entry day 11. They made the dish I never wrote down, but she tasted the memory. That's enough for me to keep going. If you've made it this far, thank you. That means something in this fast, noisy world. If this story speaks to you, even a little, please take a moment to like it, share it, and leave a comment below. We'd truly love to hear your voice. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that restore dignity, reveal truth, and resonate long after the screen fades. Now take a breath, and let's return to the story. What happens next may stay with you for a very long time. Junior 6, behind the fire door. Some people leave through the front door. Others never left at all. They're just standing behind a door no one dares to open. At the end of the back hallway behind Elevation's kitchen, there was a metal door. The label on its small nameplate was faded silver, the letters barely readable. Mechanical access. Authorized personnel only. Everyone called it a fire exit. But no one ever used it. Amelia had walked past it 100 times, never once thinking it held anything more than compressors and ductwork, until today. Daniel had called her early that morning. There was a strange email from the internal system. It wasn't sent from an official address, but the system flagged it as having executive-level access. Subject line: next week's menu. Lock in. No edits. The content was brief. But what made Amelia's skin crawl was the signature at the bottom. MR. She stood frozen in front of the computer screen, the blue light casting across the face of someone who once thought she'd seen every trick power could play. But no, old wounds still knew exactly when to reopen. She didn't tell anyone, didn't march up to the executive office, didn't forward the email. She simply walked, quietly, to the end of the hall. Stopped in front of the metal door. She had never tried to open it, until now. The handle was cold as ice. A soft click. It sounded like a sigh in the dark. Behind the door wasn't a refrigeration unit. It was a narrow corridor leading to a discreetly renovated room. Soundproofed walls, recessed amber lights, a solid oak desk. At the center, a sleek control screen, like something out of a data center. Printed menus lay on the table. Meal count, projections, ingredient profit margins, and a coat hanging neatly on the back of the chair. Amelia stepped forward, ran her hand across the tabletop. She recognized the handwriting on the bolded notes. Keep structure intact. Avoid plating adjustments. Highlight item number 3 for promotional focus. At the bottom, M. Her footsteps echoed softly across the hardwood floor. Not hurried, but each step felt like it sank into a space where the air had been sucked out. She stopped in front of the screen. It was displaying Elevation's internal surveillance system. Then, one of the camera feeds moved. A man, back turned, standing in the shadows of the adjacent room, the one she didn't have a key to. He turned, Maxwell Richards. She didn't gasp, didn't panic, didn't run. She just looked at him, like she was facing a ghost she once buried, only to see it rise, uninvited. That night she said nothing. Not to Daniel, not to Rachel, not to anyone. But her eyes, the eyes of someone who had once loved deeply and been betrayed just as deeply, told the whole story. Rachel knocked on the tech office. At 9 p.m. she wasn't looking for Amelia. But there she was, alone holding a stack of personnel files, staring at the kitchen staffing map. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper, like she didn't want it to be heard at all. Amelia looked up, nodded, didn't smile. Some people don't have to be present to control everything, she said softly. They leave traces in the right place at the right time and vanish, as if they never existed. Rachel stepped inside, sat across from her. A long silence settled between them. "It's my father, isn't it?" Amelia didn't respond. "He never really left." She nodded. Rachel swallowed hard, her fingers curled around her wrist as if searching for something solid to hold on to. "He told me he was betrayed." He wasn't wrong, Rachel looked up. He was betrayed by the very expectations he placed on everyone, including himself. And when no one could carry them anymore, he decided only one person was to blame. Rachel didn't know why tears rose. She had never cried for her father, never thought she would. For a man who had always been a hurried shadow or a harsh voice over the phone. He was afraid of being forgotten, she whispered. Afraid. People would remember you, and forget the man who built this kitchen in the first place. Amelia looked at her, not with bitterness, not with pride. I never wanted anyone to forget him. But did he ever want people to remember you? The silence stretched, longer than any confession. Amelia took a deep breath. Maybe. He never did. Night. In the room behind the fire door, Maxwell sat alone. No one saw him. No one knew he was there. On the table sat next week's featured dish, white radish soup. The one he had once dismissed as meaningless. He tasted a spoonful, said nothing, just stared at the door. It had been a long time since he crossed it. He hadn't had the courage, nor the humility, but he knew. His time was no longer infinite, and a fire, if not passed on, dies with the one who holds it. Chapter 7. Burn the blueprint. Some things can't be fixed, they must be taken apart. And the hardest part isn't letting go of the past. It's admitting it was once right, until it no longer was. Monday, 6:17 a.m. Amelia stood in front of her locker, her hand resting on the handle of an old canvas bag. Inside, it was everything. Her notebook, her old chef's knife, a copy of her employment file, and an unsent letter. The letter contained just 3 lines. I've done all I can, but this system doesn't want to be saved. She hadn't written it out of anger. She wrote it with acceptance, an understanding that some places don't need someone to fix them. They just need someone to bear witness as they fall. Since discovering Maxwell, she had waited for something. An admission, an email, a single appearance. But nothing came. The silence was programmed. The dishes still remote-controlled. The staff still voiceless. Even Rachel, though more withdrawn, had said nothing since that night. And Amelia, The woman who once cooked to heal, now understood. You can't heal a place that doesn't want to live. She stepped into the kitchen. All eyes turned to her. But no one spoke. No whispers. No questions. Something in the air had shifted, as if the entire kitchen knew today was the last time. Daniel found her in the staff break room. She was arranging her documents carefully, as though each sheet was a farewell. He didn't ask, just leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. You're really leaving? There's nothing left to keep me. What about the kids? They'll learn more from my leaving than from watching me stay and turn into an empty symbol. Daniel stepped forward. His voice was low, not accusing, but undeniably real. You think only you know what this kitchen needs? What about the rest of us? Don't we deserve the chance to fight with you? Amelia looked up. For the first time, she felt moved. Not by anger, not by sorrow, but by something else. A reminder that she wasn't alone in the pain. 30 a.m. The kitchen stood in a long, silent line. No one was cooking, no one chopping, just standing and watching her. Claire was the first to speak. If you leave, I won't want to bake anymore. Then Jules followed. We didn't come here to follow templates, we came here to learn. Another line cook, Mateo, usually silent, lifted a note once taped to the fridge. Stick to the process, no creativity. From anonymous management, he lit it with a lighter. The flame caught fast, and the paper turned to ash on the stainless steel floor. Rachel stepped out of line. No uniform, just a white button-down, jeans, and an expression no longer clouded. You're not allowed to leave without passing on what you carry. Amelia froze. She looked at each of them. None perfect, none seasoned, but they were here. They were standing, not bowing. You don't need me. No, Rachel replied. We need each other, and you're the first person who made us feel like that's real. Amelia let her bag fall to the floor, gently, as if the weight she'd carried for 2 years had just been lifted, without needing permission. That afternoon, Amelia walked into the executive office, not to ask, but to dismantle. She took down the old menus, filed away the KPI charts, closed every rigid evaluation form, and on the whiteboard she wrote a single note. Starting next week, each chef creates 1 dish. No recipe required, just a reason. Daniel stood beside her, silent, but his eyes gleamed, as if for the first time in years he saw the kitchen truly breathe again. Evening. Service began, but for the first time, there were no printed menus. Instead, the chefs presented dishes of their own making. Claire served, a savory tart inspired by something her mother made when exhausted. Jules presented a personal twist on Mexican barbecue, less heat, more earth, by adding ground coffee. Rachel served a simple corn soup. When a guest asked its name, she smiled and said, "This dish doesn't have a name, but the first person who taught me to listen to food never made me memorize the recipe." Amelia stood by the kitchen door. She didn't intervene, didn't lead, she just watched, like a midwife, not giving birth herself, but helping the child cry for the first time. Late that night, she stood alone in the walk-in fridge. In her hand, the last menu Maxwell had ever signed. There it was, at the bottom, M. She lit it. The fire didn't roar, but it was enough to burn what needed to be released. Chapter 8. Course Correction. Not everyone needs a fresh start, some just need permission to pick up where they left off. Elevation had never felt so quiet. Not the kind of silence that empties a room, but the kind before the first note of a symphony, a silence with rhythm, a stillness filled with focus, and somewhere in the breath before the week's first prep, someone in the kitchen exhaled without knowing why. Amelia arrived early. She still carried her old canvas bag, but inside it were no files, no knives, just a small tin box. Inside, torn scraps of paper, half-finished recipes, scribbled notes never published. "I used to think I had to keep these for myself," she told Daniel as they unlocked the chef's meeting room. "But maybe they only mean something if someone else keeps writing them." Daniel smiled. He had never seen her so light. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time, she wasn't trying to be someone she no longer needed to be. Monday morning meeting. No lecture. No roster. Just a single question written on the whiteboard. "What do you want to learn from yourself this week?" Claire spoke first. "I want to learn how to feel when dough is breathing." A young line cook followed. "I want to figure out why my grandfather's soup tasted good. Was it the ingredients or the moment?" Jules. "I want to learn how to be silent when I don't understand, instead of pretending I do." Then, Rachel. Still at the back of the room, but this time not hiding. "I want to know who my father really was. Not through stories, not through legacy, but through the food he left behind. And I want to know why someone like him was so afraid of losing himself that he couldn't pass on the one thing he was best at." No one spoke, but everyone heard. Something invisible had shifted from within. In the days that followed, Amelia no longer stood at the main station. She moved through the kitchen like a gardener, planting nothing but tending every tender shoot. She taught Rachel how to taste broth without a spoon, by breathing. She showed Claire how to test tart dough elasticity, with a fingertip, not a timer. She showed Mateo when to let meat rest, because patience is the final seasoning in any dish with protein. Recipes, she told them, can be learned by anyone. But why you choose one recipe over another, that's what makes someone a chef. Rachel started writing in a notebook, not to record others' mistakes, but to ask her own questions. Day 3. If a dish is never remembered, is it still worth making? Day 5. Dad said desserts were weakness, but he smiled once, eating Mom's mousse. Day 7. She tastes every dish like it's an old song. Maybe cooking is how we listen to what we never understood. Amelia never read those notes, but she could feel the shift. Rachel wasn't retracing someone else's path. She was drawing her own, deciding what was real and what was just someone's fear of being forgotten. A week later, Elevation launched Open Kitchen Fridays. Each night, one apprentice was allowed to serve a dish not on the official menu, no judging. Just one question from the guests. What does this dish tell me about you? Claire spoke about the pies her grandmother baked whenever her parents fought. Jules talked about the first dinner his mother made after escaping to America. Rachel hadn't gone yet. But she was working on a dish tentatively titled, What My Father Never Said. Evening. After service, Amelia sat alone in the kitchen, not to find quiet, but to listen to life. Daniel walked in, handed her a cup of tea. They're starting to believe, he said. Not in me, she replied. In themselves. What, about Maxwell? Amelia was silent for a moment. Then she answered, He's probably still somewhere, watching KPIs, approving ingredient costs, tracking menu margins. But what he'll never see is Rachel's face when she tastes her own food. He never taught that, and maybe he never learned how. Chapter 9. The Final Course. We don't need to cook something grand, just honest enough that someone won't dare swallow it too fast. Friday, 4 p.m. In Elevation's kitchen, there were no shouts, no chefs pointing fingers, no clipboards, just 12 people standing at their stations, each with an apron, a single main ingredient, and a question Amelia had written at the start of the week. If this were the last dish you were ever allowed to cook, what would you make and why? They called it the final course. It wasn't a competition, there were no judges, but everyone knew. For the first time, they would have to answer with food, not words. Amelia moved from station to station. She didn't inspect, she listened. Claire was making a tart filled with caramelized onions and goat cheese. Her eyes were wet. "Every time my grandma cried," she whispered, "she baked onions. I think she didn't want anyone to see her tears, so she let the onions cry for her." Jules was preparing a version of Oaxacan beef, but replacing the chilies with dark chocolate. "My mom made this whenever she got rejected from a job. My little brother asked why it had chocolate. She said, 'So bitterness is easier to swallow.'" At the end of the kitchen stood Rachel, silent. Her station was nearly empty. A pot of boiling corn, a bundle of Vietnamese balm leaves, a single fresh egg, and a small bowl of pork bone broth. Amelia walked up. "Are you sure?" Rachel nodded. "For the first time, yes." BCTO p.m. Dinner began. No guests, just the kitchen crew. Each person served their dish, then sat down at the long wooden table, letting others taste. Claire went first, then Jules, then Mateo. Each one told a story. No dish was flashy, no one tried to impress. When Rachel's turn came, the room fell still. She stepped forward. In her hands, a clay bowl. Inside, young corn soup, gently topped with a beaten egg, and floating balm leaves. The broth was clear, delicate, colored like an early sunset. No one spoke. Rachel didn't introduce the dish. She simply placed it down and looked straight at Amelia, the only one who seemed to know what this bowl was carrying. "My father didn't like this dish," she began. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't soft. Just true. He said it. Was too simple, too poor, too easy to forget. But this is the dish my mom made every time he was away. It's what she cooked on nights he didn't call home. The one dish she made without asking if I wanted it, because she knew I needed it. No. One reached for a spoon. They listened as if each word was part of the soup itself, something to be digested first. He said only complicated food is remembered. But my grandmother is gone now, and I still remember this, even though no one ever wrote the recipe. Rachel stepped back, said nothing more. Daniel was the first to reach. He dipped a spoon into the bowl. The rising steam was subtle, not spicy, not rich, just a familiar warmth like the scent of an old coat left on a couch after rain. He swallowed slowly, didn't speak. Claire followed, then Jules. Amelia was last. She didn't rush, she just looked into the bowl. The overhead light danced on the surface of the soup, like someone trying not to cry. When she tasted it, no one watched, but everyone seemed to hold their breath. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. She simply placed the spoon down, touched the edge of the bowl gently, and said, "This is the hardest dish I've ever taught." After dinner, the kitchen sat in silence. Amelia stood, stepped to the center. Tomorrow, this dish will be added to Elevation's menu. No changes, no renaming. She looked at Rachel. We'll call it the dish no one asked permission to love. Rachel smiled. For the first time. Not forced, not sad, just real. That night, after everyone had left, Amelia stayed behind, tidying up spoons. Rachel returned carrying a small notebook. She placed it on the counter. I used to think I came here to defend my father. Amelia looked up. But I understand now. I came here to be allowed to see him as a person, not a legacy. She slid the notebook toward Amelia. Inside, handwritten recipes. Corn soup, her mother's egg tart, a sauce her father once taught her but never wrote down. The final page held a note. Daughter of Maxwell Richards, not anyone's student. Just someone learning how to write the parts that were missing. Amelia closed the book. Didn't speak. She pulled up a chair. Sit down, she said. We're not finished yet. Chapter 10. Fire Reborn. Legacy isn't what we keep to ourselves, it's fire. And it only lives when passed on without fear of being burned. 3 days after the final course, an article appeared on Culinary Standard. The IG, same platform that had once published a scathing critique of Amelia. But this time there was no mockery, no sarcasm. The headline was simple. A dish without a name, and why we must not forget the unremarkable. No author name. No restaurant mentioned, but within its paragraphs were words no one could mistake. Corn soup, pork broth, lightly beaten egg, Vietnamese balm, and a feeling like being allowed silence for the first time in years. Not every dish needs to impress. Some just need to make us stop talking and feel. The article spread quickly, not because anyone promoted it, but because everyone who read it saw themselves in it. That Saturday evening, as the kitchen prepared for dinner service, the back door, the one made of metal, once always locked, creaked open. Maxwell Richards stepped inside, no apron, no chef's coat. Just an older man in a long coat, silver creeping through his hair, eyes no longer glittering with pride, but dulled like ash after a storm. No one moved. No one spoke. But everyone understood. This was not an entrance. It was an apology, spoken through presence. He walked slowly through the kitchen. His eyes passed over everyone. Claire kneading dough, Mateo checking the grill, Daniel calling orders, Rachel at the plating station. Didn't turn. But her hands stopped moving. Finally, Maxwell stood before Amelia. Is there still a place I'm allowed to stand? His voice was low, rough, like a long-dead fire being stirred from cold coals. Amelia didn't answer right away. She set down her spoon, wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at him, not as an opponent, not as a former teacher, but as a man from another era, facing the successors he once didn't believe could exist. Yes, she said, right next to me. Maxwell exhaled, like he'd just been given permission to return to the place he once called his own. After service, the whole kitchen sat together. A quiet ritual without name. Maxwell didn't speak of work. He didn't lecture. He simply sat, hands folded, eyes on Rachel. Not like a father begging forgiveness, but like a man seeing his child for the first time without needing to be seen back. Rachel broke the silence. I used to think you never knew how to listen. Maxwell nodded. I used to think if I stopped talking, no one would ever listen again. Rachel smiled, her eyes misting. Well, I did hear. When you stopped speaking, I finally heard your food. Through someone else. Maxwell turned to Amelia. You didn't have to do that. You could have kept all the credit, but you let the dish carry this kitchen's name instead. Amelia smiled. Not smug, not saintly, just honest. I don't hold on to things I no longer need. The next morning on the schedule board, a new name appeared. Maxwell Richards mentoring the next generation. Not as a leader, not allowed to write menus, but allowed to share technique, experience, and to listen to dishes that weren't. A month later, Elevation reopened its open kitchen nights. This time, one dish was added to the permanent menu. Corn soup, for those without a name. Beneath the listing was a small note. To those who cooked before we knew why we needed to be fed. Thank you. That evening, Amelia left Elevation. Not in anger, not in triumph, just the next step. The flame warm enough now, strong enough that she no longer needed to stand guard. Daniel walked her to the door. He didn't ask where she was going. Amelia placed her canvas bag on the prep counter, beside her old chef's knife and her notebook. For the next one, she said. Rachel stepped beside her, and for the first time, didn't say, chef. She said, Amelia, thank you for not teaching me how to be you. Thank you for teaching me how to be brave enough not to be anyone else. Amelia looked at her, nodded, smiled. Fire, she said. Doesn't need someone to guard it, just someone honest enough not to snuff it out. She walked out of the kitchen. Behind her, Maxwell was showing Mateo how to listen to the sound of butter in a pan. Rachel was adjusting Claire's plating. Daniel laughed for the first time in weeks, and the Elevation kitchen, for the first time in years, was breathing on its own. Sometimes what makes a dish unforgettable isn't in the recipe, but in the one who dares to cook it with a healing heart. If this story touched you, not because of the twists or the culinary techniques, but because you too, once carried fire in silence, were expected to hold everything together until you couldn't, stood in the kitchen of your own life, unsure if anyone still heard you, then perhaps the final course was written for you. Where are you listening from? What city holds the memory of the first dish you ever cooked for someone you loved? Drop the name of your city, and if you'd like, the dish that brings you back to you. Like this story, if it made you feel seen, share it with someone who's carrying a quiet fire. Subscribe for more stories that light the dark, because no one should be left behind. Not in the kitchen, not in life.